So if I can introduce myself a little bit about how I came to be where I'm at and how we can share. My name is Rakita, Venerable Rakkita, and I was raised in the UK and come from a Catholic background, parents. My mum was more Methodist and my dad was more Catholic background. And they've sort of drifted away lately in their golden years. They've got more back into sort of charity work, was Meals on Wheels, and they're very keen and advocate what I'm doing as well. I just got a Facebook from my mum's that's really pleased about what I'm doing. This is the second time I've been in the robes. Actually, now it's about 4 years since I've been staying in monastic training. I intend to go for a lifetime. And originally, I got interested and entered into practicing in temples and meditation courses in 1986 and until 1989. And I've been meditating before that, fascinated throughout my teens about what is meditation, how do you do it? And it was all a solo trek around the UK, just going to libraries and TM, anything that was I could find was interested in supernatural, anything. It was like that. So a little bit of Tibetan stories and so on. And then I trained in the arts, illustration, animation, and that also got me into be interested into visualization. And by the time I'd gone through about 3 years of training, I left Liverpool. I wanted to travel in the East, went to the Philippines, first of all, and I fell in love with the Philippines and at that time. And I was actually doing a bit of visualization, meditations, visualizing a light sphere of light at that time, practicing. And also this decided, how am I going to fund my life? I went to Sydney and planning to go to Hong Kong to work as an illustrator and on to fund a steady stream of earning. It went very well in Sydney, worked for major papers, magazines, did children's books and things. And on the arc traveling through Malaysia to Thailand, on the way to Hong Kong, I started to go into the areas where all the temples were. I was really fascinated with learning that you could actually go in and stay there and go to long courses, like 3 weeks long, and live in the temples. And when I met them, they fully understood these experiences, meditation, and a lot more aside from it. So I just had a complete shift and a big life shift. Didn't go on to Hong Kong, more or less Sydney, which is okay, but this is something richer and it's much more in harmony and in line with the sort of inner world that I've been discovering. And I really value their values. I come out of a capitalist city where everyone's really, really running, and there wasn't anything of that nature. It was charity-based, compassion-based, wisdom-based, and given freely, unlike the university's sort of qualifying system, and unlike schools, which were secular and values. And I just had never seen anything like it. So I was very enamored with it. I asked whether about being able to ordain. They were more than delighted to encourage that. I went back to UK, got all permission from my parents, cleared the decks, and then went back. And then spent 3 years in an insight meditation center, assisting the teacher. And so on an average day, there would be a sort of 15 to 20 Westerners staying there, coming on to interview the teacher, and then all by their mundane needs, blankets, keys, and looking after passports, and a little bit of counseling and that kind of thing, which exposed me to that lot, to the teachings and the Buddha and the rules of the monks and the rules for the monasteries and to the trials and tribulations of looking after meditators, and also more about how it works and so on. So we discussed about this, the very broad ground level of basic Buddhist culture, which isn't often shared much outside of the stock Buddhist countries, Burma, where there's 500,000 monks on any day, 300,000 nuns on any day, Sangha, Thailand, or Sri Lanka. People grow up in this age and they just hear it. So they know it like the back of their hand. And Nowadays, you've got the spread of systems that are more secular, more packaged, more vipassanas, insight, meditation, and centers. And they often don't include a lot of these foundation level work. I find it very tough to understand. It's about what the Buddha said about hand-held wealth, about friendship, about socializing, about duties, about community, more lay level things, not quite so super refined up in the stratosphere of wisdom and compassion only, which is a lot of the people hear about Buddhism. So I decided that sharing some of those was really a good idea. For example, I was invited over primarily initially to do a 4-day meditation retreat. And at the end of it, Robin, I showed him a book that I picked up in Burma called Basic Buddhist Culture, grades 1 and 2, just mapping it up. It's clear. It's very systematic and clear formula for how to comprehend things from the perspective of the Buddha. That's, for example, 6 ways of dissolving your wealth. For example, of those 6 wealth, one might be drink, another one might be gambling, another one might be indulging in entertainment or something like. So each of those have 6 more refined details. So they're very, very broad and complete compendiums of advice, guidelines. And they're very good for community, very wholesome for family, and so on. So I thought it would be a good idea to start looking at that, and also such a vast teaching. The Buddha was a person who was teaching for 45 years, and he was accompanied by at least one person who had a very good photographic memory to recall all those and repeated and stored, and that could be cross-correlated as well. For example, the teachings which were primarily occurred in the Nepal area, were transmitted verbally went round Malaysia into China and disseminated across China down into Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, Laos, that direction. And those were stored and recorded. And the recordings of those were compared with the versions that went down south into India, down through Tamil region, southern India, across to Sri Lanka, across to Indonesia, up through Malaysia. So that's a span of enormous amount of time that they were separated, and then they put them back together again and were completely in Chinese. One translated them into, and they almost a match, almost perfectly. So they've been transmitted accurately. And a lot of the time that's done by having blocks of monks, 3 at a time, come together and chant it verbally from memory. So any one of them faults on it and they'll stop and they'll go back and repeat. So that system of transmission has happened over a very long period of time. And then it's been written down as well in this palm leaf style of writing down these sutta. A sutta is a short block of story, literally means a thread. And there are totally 84,000 of those. So they include things like stories, like verses, like episodic accounts, and like rules, and how another one would be how that rule came to be, what happened to make that, what was the event happened, and then the Buddha made a rule. And 45 years of events through each one of those years. So it's difficult to know where to begin, when you face, like, it's easy to get put off. It's easy to sort of like start on entering, trying to take a bit of an interest in it and go into it the right way. You might be put off. You might go into it, a monastery, and walk out like you might be the wrong place at the wrong time. It might be the wrong language, the wrong food, and it might be the wrong book that you pick up, or overdo it. You try to take on too much of the wrong stuff and it's too heavy. So what I thought I'd do was to give some sort of maps and give an overall introduction, and in order to just sort of introduce the teachings, which are enormously rich, enormously beneficial, and very worthy to be sort of explored and discovered. So a little bit of a trial and error. It hasn't been done before. There hasn't been much Buddhism in the Philippines, and haven't been much Buddhist monks. I've been going out with an alms bowl every morning, which has been like completely a new thing. I don't think it's been done before, not in recent times. And it's an exciting time, therefore. So it's a privilege and a bit of a responsibility to make sure that we sort of discuss it and open people and to see, having a look at it and see what they think. But it's a two-way thing. So this is as much a discussion and as much as I can try to make things approachable. So this is a whiteboard with some thoughts about how to begin to explore what's going on. So these are questions about how to explore the teachings. It's quite difficult. Just exploring through visiting a teacher, through visiting and listening to a friend, through Facebook, through the internet, it's quite difficult. And there are some very key tools that are good to use. For example, tools that allow you personally to explore what the Buddha said, rather than take it through a teacher. A Tibetan monk might say different from a Thai monk or a Sri Lankan monk, for example. So you can personally do that, and this is a unique thing to our time. There are tools that we can do that. So exploring what it is, so I want to show possibilities for doing that, and then the things that can be discovered and the things that so far I've discovered. Then how to integrate that into daily life, into your regular world, into the interests and challenges that you personally are facing, and how to sort of make it have roots, so that hopefully in the future generations, they got the option. They've got a culture here that's been sort of heavily dominated by the Spanish religion and the Italian Christian religion and so on. And it would be good now, hopefully, in an era where there's more freedom and less oppression of fear of punishment from on high, from political and so on, that people can have an open book where they can sort of make their own minds up. That's it. It's not a doctrine of faith and belief. It's something to be listened to and considered. And it's primarily about the development of wisdom in order to relieve suffering. So it's not the doctrine of salvation or belief or pure faith, just only on blind, purified. So it's something to be tested and known individually by oneself. So there are different ways to look at it. When I was initially discussing with Robin, he brought up the phenomenal of chronology time lines. So there are different parts of this. The life, Gautama is the name of the family name of the person who became enlightened when they were in the 28 or something, after which they were called the Buddha, which is the title of someone who's fully awakened. So previously to that, it was tended to be called either Gautama, or there's another word which means a being that's working towards awakening, but they're very well on the way. That's called the Bodhisattva. Bodhi means awakening, and Sattva is a word in ancient Pali language for a being, for any being. So the historical Buddha, we have the life of the Buddha, which is this 45 years teaching career, and the life of Gautama tends to be from birth up until the age of actually going out and surrendering, giving up the worldly life, and so on. Very wealthy family, nobles. Whether it's actually royalty is a bit disputed, but his father was certainly very highly placed as a warrior caste, could have been a king, so he's often referred to as a prince. How he grew up, his temperament, records of how he played with his relatives, his cousin, and many things, many details. So I wanted to introduce also one particular book that handles this really well, which is called The Chronicles of the Buddhas, which is there's not just one Buddha. They previously, down through periods of time, you get beings that come into the world and teach, and then gradually that teaching will decay through misinterpretation, through laziness, through wars, through corruption, through corrupt monks and nuns, through umpteen things. And then it dissolves down into superstition, chanting, and nobody really wants to understand what they're really doing. No one's actually getting particularly enlightened from it. It's just decayed down into any form of ritual. People are just bringing animals into offering to the monks for the kitchen, and they're getting slaughtered and blah, blah, blah. Superstition rules. And then the teaching is gone. Then another Buddha will come, look for teaching, discover it. A Buddha is a Buddha because they different to their pupils who also get enlightened, that for them it's like someone trying to discover mathematics at a time when there wasn't anything like that. So when they discover zero, and then they discover numbers and discover multiplication, division, and so on. And from then on, but they were the first person who started it, and then they pass it on. So it's much easier to have something passed on, like the internet, about the internet. We didn't have to think it up and have to invent it. The Buddha was the inventor and the thinker of this era. So previous Buddhas had done that. There's something very important about this kind of chronology to consider, that we're talking about sort of life eras of people, but the Buddhist cosmology includes lower realms and higher realms, and beings in those higher realms, that angelic realms, celestial realms, have phenomenally longer lives than humans. And so there are beings that are in those realms that recall the previous Buddhas, even ones which have they've seen 2 or 3, and they've observed the phenomenon of their teaching and its decay and so on. So this is also something that features with many of these devas, we call them angels, coming down to communicate with the Buddha and also to test him as well. They also tested him to see, was he really enlightened? And because they'd spoken with the previous Buddhas and so on. And then they would give them riddles and challenges and so on. He would pass them, and he would educate the angels as well. Many of them hadn't actually heard of Buddhist teaching. They would travel far and make efforts to come down, listen to him talk. So there's also cultural Buddhism. Cultural Buddhism, in the place where it's taught, often monarchs embrace it. They see the benefit of it. And then from that point, it starts to have a patronage. It doesn't always work like that. Often it's a little bit more, you have a teacher there, and a school built up around them. And then it starts to take on a form. So the Burmese form that we've seen now, a little bit different to what you see in Thailand, which is pretty much similar, but a little bit different to what you see in Laos, what you see in Cambodia, and so on and so on. Each different culture sort of molds and shapes. It's a little bit, sometimes you see that reflected in the colors and the robes, something like that. Monks in Sri Lanka tend to wear a bright orange color, something like this. In Burma, something like this. Thailand, like. So a little bit more, you'll see that primarily they're referring to the same original teachings. And these are housed in a book called the Pitaka. T means 3. Pitaka means a basket, and this is a long block of our books, volumes, about 11 times longer than the Bible for reference, but it's not as a comparison, it's just to give you an idea of the size. This is an important thing. This is the inner teaching. There are inner teachings that refers to in life, so when you go onto meditation, of course, you're primarily, that's only about that as you get to learn about the techniques for concentrating on breathing, about the factors of the mind which will help balance, and so on. It's about your inner world, and how to navigate what we've got inside to get to a state of peace, tranquility, and wisdom and encourage and develop how to maintain the balance, how to abandon unwholesomeness and prevent it arising, and then how to cultivate the wholesome and how to maintain the wholesome, get it developed. So this is called the 4 right efforts: abandonment of hate, anger, aversions, and the abandoning of greed. And when the greed dominates the mind, spoils the character. And then egoism, conceit, and pride. And it's then their relatives like jealousy, envy, so on. Unwholesome characteristics, laziness, and things that spoil the character. So that's about the inner side of the practice. And then the outer side is more on these factors, like the geographical Buddhism, historical Buddhism, and the cultural manifestations, and the reason for the cultural manifestations, like what they're doing, what it gives to that culture, what it upholds, what it supports, what it prevents, and so on. So the outer and the inner teachings, and the inner teachings are very, very multifaceted, multi-complex, multi-layered, deep, deep teachings. They're not based on speculation, and don't address some of the questions that other spiritual teachings address. That many of those big, big questions, when they come, the Buddha said that's a question to be put aside, and that's how you don't know. It's not that I don't know, it's not the question we're addressing. The origin of the universe, there's 10 of these questions. I won't go into anything too deeply. I want to give you an overall view. So the inner teachings, the complexity of the inner working of the psychophysical system, and its cause and effect relationships that lead towards away from suffering. Outer, more not only the life of the current Buddha and the historical event that happened all around, including the kings and monarchs, the rulers and the governors and the societies and the individuals. And this is the cities and everything that sort of happened all around before and after the Enlightenment. Geographically, all the different cultures that covered. So the previous Buddhas and the pre-Buddhahood, the Bodhisattva. Previous Buddhas, in a typical Sri Lankan temple, they do a celebration of 28 previous Buddhas, but you often see it also as 24 previous Buddhas. I won't go into, again, too much detail or too much hair splitting on these things at the moment, but there are enormously long periods between them as well. And the Buddha had this ability to see very profoundly into the past, deep past, and could perceive things as they had been before. So sometimes he'd be walking on his assistant and they would stop and he would just be gazing into apparently blank area. And he'd say, like, what is it? He's saying, this used to be a city on this place, and there used to be a shrine here where the previous Buddha was, that they adopted the king, so that he could sort of penetrate into the deep past and see those kind of things. And during the 24th previous Buddha, 24th, right. A road worker came to that Buddha and gave him such an honor when he heard that he was coming along. And the Buddha penetrated into his future and his potential, and he said, you will become a Buddha. So that was the beginning of the current Buddha's development, where he made his aspirations to perfect things, and he did them systematically. He then gave up what he was doing and started deliberately, just went off. He said, I'm going to deliberately perfect giving at that point. So it's just the function and the act of giving, like giving life, giving limbs, giving food, giving medicine, or giving buildings, or giving education, all the different things explored about this phenomena of perfection and its flaws. So you can actually reach total perfection through giving. That was his kind of primary. And then the developing of that perfection, which is called dana, which is offering, led to the second one, for example. So the development of these, he then worked on 10 of these perfections, one by one, to one of this path. This is a bodhisattva when they're working and they're cultivating the developments, and said that when the Buddha came to his enlightenment night, he was able to summon up from the earth, physical earth, had stored all these perfections. And when he was like heavily, powerfully tested, he was able to summon up all his perfections he had done before. Mara is a name for the evil forces. So they can be personification in one aspect of it, allegorical, which is the power of jealousy or the power of weakness or the power of temptation, the power of basically temptation. It's like that. And it's a tricks to make him give up and slip away and basically abandon the effort like this. So when that happened, the Buddha just said, I summon the earth as my witness. All these previous events and all these previous merits came up and dispelled is this hallucination of tempting forces. They call the 10 daughters, 3 daughters and 10 different forms. But like one of them is like lust, one is passion, one is raga, where they come up, just tempt the Buddha to give up. He basically was trying to completely defeat the internal forces of lust, of hate, and anger, of all apathy, doubt, restlessness, jealousy, and ego. So basically, yeah. Yeah, yeah. For example, like dana, virtues. Yeah, virtues. Yes, exactly. Yes. So they're not directly 10 opposites, but there is a relationship. Like with dana, giving, the opposite is taking, greed. So we can correlate it in that way. That's not the direct. There isn't a direct correlation. One of them was a fear, and it was a huge elephant which they'd actually had armored elephants in those times, and they had also the tusks. They would put a kind of form of spear, sharpened plow, and when they charged, they actually really existed. So many people were terrified seeing like a row of these coming, because it's like a row of lawnmowers or something. You've got no chance if you're running on the ground, and the Buddha was just going to sit there. And these visions were vivid. So he'd been on sleep deprivation and all kinds of different things, forcing his mind to confront these things. But this was at the sight of a charging wild elephant with these great big metal spears and sharpened things. And he just used his power to be able to penetrate into and dispel it. And all the arrows, thousands of arrows that came, the Buddha managed to turn them into flowers in the air. There was quite a lot of accounts of the Buddha doing miracles as well, which have seen by other people. Those are probably, but we can't actually say. They were probably hallucinations, but we can't actually say. All these things can be gone into much more detail. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but because it's vast, there are a vast amount. But so, like one of these things, like the previous Buddhas' stories, the Chronicles is one of the books that I would like to suggest, but with enough interest, enough diligence, people to go through and just go through and map it out, start to see, because that goes chronologically through the first 45 years and just says what happened every different summer, for example, where he stayed, what happened, So that's really worthwhile, just at least once to go through the whole thing. And The book itself, that's called the Buddha Vamsa Chronicle, is actually quite recent. Just give you a bit of a background about that book. The author of it, his name is Mingun Sayadaw. Sayadaw is the name of a master, high master, and Mingun is a district of Burma. And that monk had a photographic memory. He is in the Guinness Book of Records because so that Tipitaka is 11 times longer than the Bible, and he memorized as a complete memory. So he was able to recall it perfectly. And the Guinness Book of Records, people came and tested him. He would read 5 words of any one sentence. So he would continue, and he would just continue the next 10 lines perfectly. They tested him over and over again throughout the whole thing. I just met a monk who does this. That Mingun Sayadaw has passed away. And they say he reborn from an angelic realm. And because in the 50s in Burma, there was a big council meeting. It's only in the 6th one since the time of the Buddha where they called together the enlightened monks and they check the teaching is on track. And they use that by also this same method of at least one. It depends in an era. There might be only one who can recite 2 of the books, another one who can recite the other one. And they will sit there and they confer over it. I don't know how many days, and they do it for many, like 3 weeks or something, and just keep pummeling them with these questions to cross-check and make sure that it's all one matches up. And then, so he was the one, he did it all on his own. He didn't need to in this case. He just sat there and they just cross-riddled him from all the teachings and make sure they're all ready up, and it all did. He was then asked by the Prime Minister to create, like Robin asked, can you do a chronological one? That would be good for us to just be in one book, say 2 volumes, to be able to read the actual life story that's kind of compressed enough to not too huge, and it wasn't anything like that. And so he did it. So he also, using phenomenal sort of ability to remember all the different teachings, he also compiled it, and it's really good because he would sort of talk about, something that happened in one of the summers or something, and he would also be able to sort of bring bits from the book to clarify or compare or explain or illustrate it better. And so it's a very good book and very rich in both mythology and history and stories, and all the while it keeps it structured, which is one of the things I want to show you, the structure of that book. It's free. I got it. It was all the books, proper Dharma books are always given for free. I've got it here on a thumb drive, and I can pass it to you anytime. Yeah. Yeah. It's just one of them. I want to show you compendiums that you can then go on a holiday, just like browse and read, and all on your own, if necessary, just to sort of like go through. There's a lot of those some other books, like they're like 2 volumes or 1. So he composed the chronicle, and that's very good. And he also composed this book, what was to do with the composure of this book, the small one, Basic Buddhist Culture. That's very good because that vast knowledge he was able to compress in just what's needed for people who are fairly being introduced to. So there's different parts of the history. So there's the history of the schools themselves. Squabbling usually happens with anything, but it happens within 100 or 200 years of the Buddha dying, where people started to sort of mix or invent their own preferred version of events. And then the old masters would come up and say, listen to what they're teaching, and just say, that's not accurate. And then they'll get squabbles and splits and divisions, and then they get recalls and these big council meetings where they would formally argue to clarify what had actually happened. For example, like I would give an example, someone often they were saying that the Buddha was never really physically real. He was a hologram. They were projected from heaven or something like that. And they were saying, no. He got backache and he sneezed, and aches, and he was definitely had a physical body, and so on. So this sort of history of the schools comes across, which is the development of show you the timeline, which is this one, which is the early Sangha, 450 BC, and then we have the formation of this early period where they start to split a little bit. Technically, they said there were 18 schools, various different versions of the teachings. So some of them preferred to not touch money. Some other ones said, so they became a division. Some said he went to die and then went to heaven, and others said he definitely didn't, and other ones, and others. And actually, discussion quite interesting in themselves. There's a book called The Points of Controversy. It goes through these one by one. And those, it looks like a tree where you get the Theravada school, which is this one I'm a member of. It gets really founded. It was a little bit less formalized in the early days, and then it gets more formalized. And then you get these other ones that branch off, and some of those start to reestablish themselves. Hundreds CE, Mahayana also, because it took time to go around the Himalayas, get established and start formulating. China, and the area of Chan moves over, it comes to Zen. In Japan, you get it coming down into Korea, Taiwan, and that's fairly much how the Mahayana started to get formed. And then 700 years ago, sorry, not 700, 500 CE, Vajrayana. The Vajrayana is a diamond yana, is a vehicle. For Mahayana, Mahayana also preferred to take on a view that it is not quite so, I'm going to go off and get enlightened by myself. They prefer to take a view that this is only all about saving everyone, like a sort of salvation and a self-sacrifice viewpoint like that. It tends to be emphasized, therefore, saving all animals and be a little bit more compassionate emphasis directly. Therefore, you get a lot more like Red Cross styled or Salvation Army styled schools of Mahayana nowadays. Tzu Chi Foundation do a lot of earthquake relief and so on. So this is a sort of general background, a little bit about the formation of the Mahayana. You get a sort of blend of some friction between Theravada, Mahayana, and some synthesis where it gets on fine. You get places like Malaysia or Penang where you get a big mixture, and you get some temples, you get everything sort of mixed all together, non-sectarian places. Other places you get a bit more rigid on both sides, where they say definitely they got it wrong, we definitely got it right, they vice versa. But the overall thing is with Theravada that you have to go to the path on your own and reach enlightenment through your own efforts, come what may. And that's through attaining the state of nirvana, which is attained in meditation. So that's tending to be, and then once you're fully enlightened, after having attained that 4 times, however long it takes, you're freed, completely freed of ego, desire, and hate. So it's a kind of like done. That's the point of liberation, having no rebirth. After Mahayana, tendency is it's like, I won't get enlightened until everyone else is, sort of different. Vajrayana started to go Bhutan, Tibetan areas, started to have this kind of thing, a lot more visualization, because they were already doing a lot of that there. Lamas and so on, they used to visualize deities a lot more. So instead of just talking about compassion, like we're going to talk about the goddess of compassion, the deity of compassion, and then instead of talking about like loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity, we talk about 4 deities, and they become embodied personifications which have colors and trinkets that are visualized and symbolize them. Snakes, medicine sticks, and all sorts of things that represent those. Tend to get a lot of less of that than in the Theravada. Some say that a lot of these schools are sort of mystification with a tinge of intellectualism, of rationality, and Theravada is intellectualization or rationalization with a tinge of mysticism. So it's like a mysticism, rationally tinged mysticism, and mystically tinged rationalism. It's not altogether true. And some of the viewpoints of these are quite aggressive in a way. They start saying things like that, all of these people back here weren't ready for what we've got now, the teaching that we've got. It's only revealed at a later time. There's a bit of a sort of put down. Mahayana was only ready at that time. And before that, they were only ready for some farming Dhamma. It's quite an arrogant point, but there you go. Each to their own. And then we got Tibetan Buddhism arriving about then as well, although it sort of stems from a similar root. There's a sort of several Vajrayana schools, several Tibetan schools, Buddhist schools. So there's not as old as well. People tend to think the Tibetan was the first one. It's not the case because it just wasn't wanted by the rulers. They come in sort of warrior warlords and feudal systems with their great big lama systems and everything. Then they come along and they go, what have you got? We've got rising, falling, sort of meditation. They said, we don't want it. And they couldn't see much benefit. And then afterwards, somebody goes and they manage to defeat some magician in a philosophical debate, right? Like that. And they start to see more advantages or counterpoints to what's going on. At some point, the ruling monarchs or the ruling sort of authorities give it the thumbs up and it goes. Or you get some charismatic teacher. So there's also Silk Road Buddhism, which is this traveling of the teachings going around the Himalayas. So Silk Road, and the Silk Road linked China and Iran and down into the Middle East as well. And Buddhism went that way as well. And it ends up, you get Bodhi trees in the Palestine area, and you get Greek kings being interested in Buddhism and going and meeting Bactrian King Melinda. And he goes and meets with Arahant monks, and they quiz them and question them. So we get a lot of records of Buddhism being transmitted very early on over into those societies. So just a review before we go on too far. We got 254. So about what it means to explore. One thing it means to exploring this timeline and the cultures, and then what it means. Then there's exploring the actual inner teachings and actually what it's, when I say inner, it's not like hidden or some sort of esoteric thing. I don't mean that. I just mean literally our own body-mind link. That's what I mean by that. And then discovering things about both. And then how to integrate that in daily life and into whatever your life sort of situation makes you curious, and what benefits you can get from that, and how to hopefully get it sort of settled into the roots so that it gets nicely established. So it's not even clear yet whether there wasn't Buddhism here before. Could have been that when Spanish came with the Inquisition and all their brutal tact and diplomacy, that they could easily have been in small amounts, though through China linked, through Cambodia, Vietnam links, and or from Malaysia and up through Sarawak and like that as well. So it could be good to see whether you can share some of the benefits of the teachings for the community as well. This given an option. So the life of Gautama, with all of the things of his mother, brother, cousins, and stepbrothers and cousins, all those sort of things. There's lots and lots of rich detail and no shortage of stories and stuff that are very full from. So many of them have not allegorical, useful meaning to give us insights into the character of the Buddha and his cousin, jealous cousin, pretty bullyish cousin, hunting swans, and shots a swan down, and it falls down, and the Buddha finds the swan with an arrow through it, and he tries to heal and protect the swan, and he lets it protect. So that whole story, for example, and how they both go to a council, and the council decides that the Buddha is in the right, but the other one says it's mine because I shot it, and he says holding onto it the side of hunting and killing, so where it starts to show the character of the Buddha in youth and growing up, and his qualities starting to emerge, even though as he also was skilled in wrestling and archery, and he was able to sort of demonstrate those things as well. That he had both sides. He was putting them. There's a lot about his father's relationship, and there's a lot about where he was raised in a gated community where he was very sheltered and not exposed to any of the poverty and loss and grief and distress and torment of much of the world. His father was determined that he wasn't going to see. He had a prediction from an astrologer. He was either going to be a ruling monarch, which his father said is great. That's exactly what I want. And they said, son, we're going to rule the world and our family is going to be the dominant ruling family. Or he's going to be a high sage, going to be prophetic guru. No. Don't anyone any of that. I want chariots. He's going to be the sort of George Bush Jr. So tons of stories all about that. And then that's even when he's only 28. So there's another 45 years of this, which is microscopically recorded. And much of it is our teaching lessons that they're not made up. They're teaching stories that show what was really happening. And he really had a lot of adventures with the cousin trying to always take away his success, trying to kill him. A lot of the time, his cousin was always trying to do things like drop rocks on him and get wild animals drunk and set them on him, and all of which the Buddha managed to handle without getting. So yeah, when you're looking at history, because history can also miss the point because it's an inner teaching about you and your own inner world. When we get on to these history of the schools, you can do that for 10 years and you would never meditate. You're just going on and on about the sanas and the vajrayanas and all the differences and everything. And that's only in those days. You never mind what's going on today and all the ins and outs of politics and Sri Lankans and all you name it. There's so just to give you like a sweep of some of the things that are included when we talk about Buddhist culture, and then also be able to start to prioritize and sort things out. This is quite difficult, even though you go to a Buddhist library, it's overwhelming. So there's the spread of the schools by geography. There's the history of schools by the events that happened in time and space. So usually when you're dealing with Buddhism, you're not really dealing with time and space. Primarily about nibbana, attaining a state of mind which is beyond time and beyond space and beyond suffering, which is entangled with time and space. So the mind is entangled with time, the mind is entangled with space, and the body is entangled with time and space. So it's about unentangling in those things. So we don't want to get too entangled up about this when you come in to try and find out what the Buddha was teaching. Sometimes you give people like 3-sentence teaching, that would be enough. They would just be liberated. He wouldn't give a whole, when I was 13, he wouldn't go back down his whole time and talk about his previous lives unless he had a function. So very important to, when you approach timelines, to bear that in mind. So yeah, the outer and inner teaching is very important. And inner teachings I'll come to this. This is a model. This is often displayed as a pagoda. So when you see a physical pagoda, like Shwedagon pagoda, and its beautiful pagodas, they are representatives, teachings in a physical form. I've done this, which I think is one of the most sort of simplified ways to view a symbol of the teachings, which is that if we put it in the center there, you have wholesome, this represents wholesome lay life, integrated family life, harmonious society, good friendship. So loving, happy, contented, healthy main life, not a monastic or retreat existence or life. That area represents that. And from there, people fall away into unwholesome, dysfunctional life, red light district life, gambling, drinking, drugs, and crime, and so those kind of things. Antisocial behavior, and also towards mental ill health on the hatred side, on the ego views side, entangled views, and getting entangled in addictions, craving, and everything where that spirals, and there's no bottom to that. Therefore, because I only listed 9 or 10 things there, but any of those could get refeeding, stealing, cocaine, to porn addiction, to gambling online, to on and on and on. And then killing things, revenge because you lost your control, and then no end to how low and how troublesome that could fall. So primarily, one of them in relation to the Buddhist teaching was to prevent people falling into that through wrong livelihood, like trading in arms, armaments and drugs, or people like slavery, or livestock, or toxic poisons, like chemical weapons. For example, many resultant things are almost irreversible if they are actually non-reversible. And like we talked to someone who's had a marriage love affair, it's like the stain that they find almost impossible to reverse. So a lot of the things are setting up a moral code of conduct to shield people against making mistakes, be they very young, be they in their early 20s or late teens, and so on. Don't mess it all up from the get-go. So giving people guideline, giving people structure and teaching that's easy to refer to, prevent this loss of wealth and loss of health and loss of opportunity. Dana, this is the giving side, charitable giving in terms of material and non-material. And then there are many, many subcategories that get gone into, including the Buddha, of course, Chronicles. It goes into each of these perfections in deep, complex detail, numerical detail. Pretty much covers the whole of all questions you need to know about. Dana. So Dana is the first basis, and when that level is established, people can then build up. And that if that level isn't built, then because this is primarily like an opening of the heart, Buddha would always talk about dana whenever you gave a talk, be it to a group of people. Dana would be the first thing in encouragement of that. Once people's heart is in a state of, if they can't get to a point of charity to go beyond their own needs, the needs of someone else, there's no point in talking about the rest of it. So dana, and it's also not giving only to me and mine, it's giving beyond that boundary, and the perfection of that. So this level needs to be stable and established. Morality, which again is non-hatred, because it's refraining from any kind of killing. So the hatred is restrained, at least on the physical level, on what you do with your physical body. Never know what happens in the mind later on. That's another level of deal with in the meditation. But to undertake a training not to kill even the small things and ants and insects and so on, then and up. So the morality levels are numerically taken. This is called a gradated teaching, like the ocean shelving, that people go to the extent that they feel they're comfortable, they can do. So they undertake 5 precepts: not to kill and not to steal, which is dana, is the opposite of one, and then not to use perverted sexual pleasure. So that's using sadistic rape or pedophilia or adultery and married, some sort of a lot of perversions, right? Zoophobia, whatever it's called, sex in the zoo. And then speech. So those 3 are activities of the body. So next is a speech, and that has 4 primary types. One is deliberate misinformation. So it's lying. It's knowingly, deliberately misinforming. And the second is slander, false accusations, and gossip about a person, maliciously intended. And the third one is just coarse or harsh or vulgar speech, rude speech, offensively. And the fourth one is nonsense talking, just rambling nonsense. It's got to be good for amusement and for frivolously wasting the time for no benefit. It's empty talk. And then drugs and alcohol, which lead to loss of wealth, loss of mental health, loss of memory, loss of wealth, loss of reputation, pictures on Facebook, and so on. So morality needs to be 5 at the basic. When there's someone to say, yeah, I'm practicing Buddhism, I'm actually following and I'm expecting to get results out, I'm investigating this. People need to have the minimum level to be doing that, and combined with dana. So once that's stable, and that can also be increased to 8 precepts when people go and stay in a meditation center, including restraining on mindful eating, and then including not beautifying the body. So just restraining on what the body is used for. So in terms of jewelry and perfume, so on. And then watching out for idleness. So big scrumpy duvet, sleeping pants and stuff, high comfortable luxury beds and sort of thing. So they get more not addicted to sleep. So not being addicted to food, not being addicted to so much entertainment, the whole red light, whole dancing world and all that sort of thing. Not also being addicted to sleep, where you can sleep like endlessly and you're able to overpower. That's the effort, yeah. That's a minimum effort. But it's something that you undertake by yourself. Like you undertake it also with the understanding that the benefits that you get from it, according to what you put into it. So it's not like some lightning strike will come down from the sky and punish you. It's just that you undertake it, yeah. You go to somewhere you're training with and say, I undertake to that precept. Just being with someone now who's at the retreat, and he did the 5 precepts at the end. He said, so yesterday on the way home, I bumped into a guy's bumper. Said, yeah, I had a glass of wine before he went back, and I was really tired. And it would have contributed to it. So it's just sort of leads to mindfulness, leads to less mindfulness. And so it's heavily encouraged, certainly drugs. And yeah, basically the answer is yes, it's just off the alcohol. that's 8 precepts. It's for people in